Hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial here. So this time we are in a new third-person project, and I will give you a quick demo of what the system here is going to do. It's going to be a little fade out. This was a requested project for someone in my Discord. So you can see the camera, it doesn't clip, and instead it has this nice little fade out effect for any meshes that you're possibly overlapping with for the camera. Awesome, so let's get into actually how to make it. Oops. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to open our project settings, and we're going to need to make a new collision profile here. So we're going to need a new object channel, and we will just call this one fade mesh, and we're going to want it to default response block. This is going to essentially take over the block channel for the normally you'd use the block all or block all dynamic for world objects, and instead we're going to use this fade mesh so that way it doesn't clip with the camera. So now we're going to make a new profile here. These are like presets, so we're going to just call it the same thing. We're going to call it fade mesh. We're going to say collision enabled query and physics, so that way it can take the responsive block all dynamic. If you want to compare them, excuse me, you can just look back at block all and block all dynamic and see the difference between the two. So one of them is world dynamic, the other is world static, and instead we're just going to put fade mesh. And the key part here is you want to ignore the camera channel. So now that that is set up, what we need to do is go into the player. And so I have these world settings here. I'm just going to set this to third person game mode. This will allow me to quickly, you don't need to do this, but it is really handy to just quickly find your third person character. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the camera boom to be a target arm length of 1000. And what this does is it pushes the camera back a little farther. So if we look, you have this nice big third person perspective. Cool. So let me go back here. We can leave all the other settings as they are. Next thing we're going to need is we're going to need to implement the begin play event, and from here we're going to do set timer by event. And on the event we're going to do custom. We're just going to call this fade check. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to set it to looping. We're going to set the time to 0.2. You can do like 0.25. You could probably even do 1 second and get away with it. Since this isn't really doing anything too important. And just as always, I like to save the reference to the timer in case we ever want to clean it up later. So we'll just call this fade check timer. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a variable, and it's going to be of type actor. And then we're going to click the little ball here, and we're going to change this to an array. And we're going to click a new variable, and now we have 2 actor arrays. So this first one is going to be called new hits. The second one is going to be called previous hits. This is how we can keep the references. So what we need to do here is we need to do first thing we're going to do is we're going to clear the new hits, so that way we have a fresh array to work with each time we want. And then next we're going to do a line trace for objects. Actually, we need a multi-box trace for objects, so that way we can hit multiple. And we also want it to be a box trace, so that way we can fully see the character and it's not just a line. If you are running into performance errors or performance issues, since this is a timer that's set to 0.2, you shouldn't really, unless you have a really, really big project. But if you do, you can set this to like a couple line traces and maybe make it a little more performant. Alright, so now for the start and end, we're going to start at the mesh. Actually, we'll start at the capsule, since the mesh kind of always has a weird offset. And then we'll also end at the camera. So we're just going to get world location, both of these. Let's give us a little more space to work with here. So I'm going to copy that, paste that, and here we have the second one. So start and end, and then half size we can just promote to a variable. And we can just call this box extent. And for the orientation, what we're going to do is we're going to get the world rotation of our camera. just plug that right in. So for object types, I'm going to do make array, and the only object we want to find is that fade mesh that we just created. And trace complex, this all looks good. You don't need anything, we don't need to ignore any actors or anything like that. And then for draw debug type, I recommend when you first set this up, because you probably aren't using the default skeleton, you set this to for duration. I already know my box extent, but just for the sake of this tutorial, we'll do 2 by 2 by 2. And then you can see this trace happening in real time, and you see that it's only getting that really small portion for our player. So what we want to do is we want to change that. Let me see. So for this one, we're going to do x value of 2, y value of 15, and a z value of 80. And now when we run this, we should see that it traces pretty much the exact size of our player from our camera. So we get the full view of the player. So now I'm going to, since we have that all locked in, I'm going to set that to none. And out of our out hits, we're going to do a for each loop. And break the array here, break the hit result. And I'm going to get this hit actor, and we're going to add it to the new hits. And if you want to be a little cleaner, you can just put a little node down here and then wrap that up, and it should clean that up a little bit for you. Cool. So drag that out. And then next thing we're going to do is we're going to see if we can find this one in our previous hits. This might not make a lot of sense right now, but I promise you it will. So if you hover over find, you'll see that it says if you hover over the green dot for the integer, you'll see the index was found or -1 if not found. So if it's not found, we want to see if it's equal to -1. And we're just going to put a little branch down here. So if we did not find it in the previous hits, remember we just added to the new hits, not the previous one, then what we want to do is we want to add it to that previous hits. So we're just going to copy this little add right here and add it to the previous hits. And we can clean this up like that. And there's another step we're going to do later, but let's just get the logic down for this. And then on the next run through, so what we want to do is we want to do the for each loop again. And now we want to, instead, because we were just creating the new hits, so now we want to check all the old hits. So this is going to be for the fade out, and then this is going to be for the fade in. So if we can't find it on the second time, that means that it's no longer blocking. It no longer got hit by that trace. So that means that we're going to start the fade out, since it's out of the trace distance. So on the previous hits, we want to see if we can find it this time in the new hits. Oh, just take this. There's also one for our map. Don't get those too confused. They're a little bit different. They're just different variable types. So we'll find on the new hits. And just like the last time, we're going to do this if it's equal to -1. Then execute, and if that is true, then we're going to just remove it. Remove item, and here we can just drag that in from the previous hits. So now we need to actually implement the logic for this to work. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder here, and it's just going to be called blueprints. Inside this, there's going to be two folders. One's going to be called world objects, and the second is going to be called iFace for interface. And we'll start with the interface, that way we can just wrap up this player and call it a day in that blueprint. We'll go with blueprint interface from blueprints, blueprint interface, and we'll call this BPI fade interface. And we just need two functions, start fade, and a second function for end fade. No variables, no inputs, no outputs. Very, very simple. And now what we can do here is on our fade out, what we can do is we can start fade from this. So from that actor that we hit, that is now being added to the array, and if it was no longer found, we can end fade. Perfect. And that is done. And now, so we go back to our blueprints folder, go into world objects, and we'll create a new, sorry, not a new folder, we need a new actor. New blueprint actor. And we'll call this BP underscore fade mesh. So a couple variables we're gonna need here. We'll do, this one will be a static mesh. So, and we'll call it mesh to use. We'll have another one here, we'll call it fade material. This is gonna be a material. And this actually can be a material interface. That way we can use both a raw material and a material instance, in case you wanted to make children of them in the future. And then the last thing we're going to need is a float. And we're just going to call this ending fade amount. And for all three of these, what we're going to do is we're going to set it to instance editable and expose on spawn. So that means that when we drag it into the world, we will be able to actually change some of these values. And we'll just put some defaults here. So the mesh will be a cube. The material we haven't created yet, and the ending fade amount we need to compile for it, and we'll just put a 2.01 for example. And let's create that material real quick. So new folder, materials, new material, and we'll call this M fade. So here we need to make sure we set its blend mode to translucent. And then we can do two parameters. We'll do a vector parameter for the color, and we'll drag that into base color, and then we'll also do a scalar parameter, which is just 0 to 1, and this will be the opacity. Drag those in, and we'll set their defaults to 1, and the colors default to white with a full alpha. And save it here. Awesome. So now we go back into our fade mesh, and now we can set that M fade. Perfect. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually, we'll do a static mesh here. So we'll add the component, and then in our construction script, we can actually apply some of these variables. So we're going to drag out from our static mesh, and we're going to say set static mesh. And we can just use this mesh to use. Oops. And we can drag off from our material, and we can say create dynamic material instance. And this creates a new copy for us to work with. If you don't do this, then all of the materials in the world will share the material. And since you want objects to fade one by one and not fade all out together, you can share the materials. So for the fade material, we're going to promote this to a variable. And this is going to be, we'll just call it fade dynamic material. Perfect. And now all we need to do is actually apply it. So we'll take our reference to the static mesh component here. That is this guy. And we'll say set material. And all we're going to do is we're going to drag out from this dynamic material that we just created and apply it. Perfect. So now we need to actually implement this interface. We can delete all these functions here. You can just go to class settings, add an interface, implemented interface, go to add here, and click the fade interface. So now you'll see under this you'll have two functions. So you can right click and implement, and right click and implement. And what we're going to do for this is we're going to start a new timeline. This is going to be called the fade timeline. So you can use event take if you prefer. and that would allow you to have a little more control over the actual time of the timeline, because this new time, I'm pretty sure it just sets it to, so I have a flow track, it'll set it to that time in the like, imagine there's like a little play button, it'll set it to the play button to that time. But what we're going to do here is we're just going to call this fade amount for the float track. It's right here, float track. And we'll set its length to 0.1. And we'll add 2 keys. Let me just make sure, yeah, okay. We start at 0, so time, you just could right click anywhere, add a key, and then you set time to 0, and you set the value to 0. Click, make sure that takes effect, and then you add a new key here. We'll set its time to match the length up here, so it'll be 1, and the value will be 1. Just for the sake of the tutorial, I'll set it to 2, and the only thing I'm going to change is the time. So we always want our ending value to be 1 and our starting value to be 0. It has no relation to the time or anything like that. Even if it was 1.5 second duration, I would still have it at 1. So and that's just going to be part of the math that we're going to do for this fade amount. So on update, all we're going to do is we're going to take our dynamic material and we're going to set a scalar parameter value, and that'll be on update. So there's just going to be a little bit of math here. We'll do float minus float, and we'll get the ending fade amount, plug that into the bottom, so it'll be 1 minus the ending fade amount, and then we're going to multiply that by the fade amount in our timeline, and this will give us something to subtract by 1. Since opacity can't really go past 1, it's pretty solid to just work with 1 as the value. And we're just going to 1 minus this again. So we're creating a value to subtract from 1, and as that ramps up, it'll create a larger and larger number. So if our ending fade amount is 0.01, I'll set this just 0.1 for example, then it's going to start at 1, and it'll be times 0. And as it grows in size, it'll create a value that is essentially 0.9. This value times 0.9. So at its ending, it'll be 1 times 0.9, if that makes sense. And that'll give us that nice fade effect. And here we just want to make sure that these names match up properly. So it's called opacity. Capitalization does matter. So make sure your parameter name here matches exactly word for word. So let's give this a shot. Let's see here. I'm going to drag a couple in the world. Oops. And if I hover over them, oops. Oh, we forgot to apply the collision preset. So we got to make sure that we select the static mesh in our fade mesh and set it to fade mesh. So now the camera shouldn't clip behind it, and there you go. You have a nice fade effect as you take the camera away. Oh, it looks like there's some problems with the collision there. So let's go into our I'm going to remove this and replace them. That's how I have it in my project. So this could be part of it. And here we're going to, this one shouldn't matter, but I just want to match my project exactly. And let's make sure we're working with the new hits. Yep. Huh. Let's see if that happens here. Might have missed something. Regardless, I'll upload the. I'll quickly cover over the code from this project, and upload this project to the GitHub instead of the other one. So if you wanted to just download the project and steal the code from this, it would work fine. But it seems like there's a problem with that. So this is the other project right here. We are clearing new hits. We're adding new hits. Let's compare. And it's this one. So if we compare them, it looks like step by step it's the exact same. Previous hits. Oh, if we add that and we click on this, full screen this. Let's see. Yeah, there you go. Just had to do with the update order. Perfect. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.